Welcome to your Hope-Filled Perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. I'm so delighted that you've joined the program today, and I think that today's episode is going to be one that is going to encourage and inspire you. If you have ever struggled with depression or have a loved one who does, then today's the episode that you want to listen to and you want to share with your friends. Scripture tells us in Job 33:28, God has delivered me from going down to the pit, and I shall live to enjoy the light of my life. And Psalm 30 verse 5 says, weeping may remain for a night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. And that's what we want to share with you today. Today, we're going to be talking about how my guest was able to break the bonds of depression with the Lord's help and wants to offer that same hope to you. Today, we're going to be talking to my friend, Patty Mason. She's a wife, a mother, a grandmother, an author, a national speaker, and the founder of Liberty in Christ Ministries. Patty has shared her story of God's redeeming grace and deliverance from depression before numerous audiences in several books, blogs, and magazines, such as Lifeway's Living More, as well as on radio and television programs. And today, she's joining us to share her story to give you encouragement and hope as well. Welcome to the program, Patty.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me on.
You know, you and I have been acquainted for several years now, and I love how God brings people across each other's paths. I don't think when we first met that we knew what we had in common or how much we had in common, but I'm grateful for that bond, and I'm grateful that you're here to share your story today.
Thank you. I'm so thankful to be here with you.
You wrote the book, Finally Free, Breaking the Bonds of Depression Without Drugs. What inspired you to write Finally Free?
My own healing. I was in such a pit of darkness, in such despair, to the point of I had lost all hope and was at a point where I was convinced my family would be better off without me. I had no way out. I had no hope. I had no other way in my mind of ending this thing. And so when God delivered me from depression and showed me the hope that I can have in Jesus Christ, I wanted to share that hope with others, to let them know that the darkness doesn't have to consume their life, that there is hope and that they can have it.
You know, you said something that I think is so common that I have heard from so many people, patients and friends and loved ones, and that is that in my mind, I didn't think there was any other way out. And that's an example. You know, we've both written about this, and in Hope Prevails, I wrote about the fact that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he does that by lying to us. And it sounds like that was a lie that he convinced you to believe. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I bought it hook, line, and sinker.
Let's talk a little bit about what life was like for you prior to depression, because some people have never struggled with it, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And if you haven't struggled, sometimes it can be hard to understand. And in fact, I heard someone say just this week, what does she have to be depressed about? So if you haven't struggled with it, bear with us, because it's not that logical. It doesn't always happen just when someone has a major life tragedy. In fact, it can come about when from all outward appearances, things are going great. And you were a career woman and doing well. So will you tell us a little bit about what was life like before depression hit?
In the world's eyes, I had it all together. My friends used to call me Perfect Patty because I always looked good and my kids always looked good and my house was always clean and I had a husband who loved me. I had no major money worries. I had this nice home. I had a successful career, and yet my soul was dying. But I hid behind a mask for a long time. Nobody knew what I was going through. Nobody knew how I was feeling, what I was thinking. And so I suffered in silence for a long time. Because how on earth can somebody who looked as good as I did on the outside have, like you said, depression or have any sort of problems? And so it's hard. It's hard for people who have never battled depression to understand what it is. Even my sweet husband, I remember when I did finally get to the point where I started to reach out to family and friends, they didn't get it. They did not understand. They didn't believe me. And even my sweet husband would say, oh, you'll get over it. They don't understand the darkness.
Yeah, our husbands have that in common. But something you just said, I think, is crucial, and that is from outward appearances, you looked like perfect
Mm-hmm.
Patty and you wore a mask. And I think so many of us do that as a protective barrier because people won't believe us or they'll ridicule us. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know about you, but when I wore that mask was heavy.
It can really weigh you down because it's a persona that you've started. So now you've got to continue it.
Yeah,
It almost feels as if you are assigned a part in a play and you need to play that part perfectly. And you need to
forever.
look, yes, and you need to look like you have it all together and look like you're really good doing it. Um, but it's actually, I remember the day when I finally took the mask off. I had gotten to a point where I didn't care anymore what anybody thought.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the reason why we continue to wear the mask because, like you said, we worry about people's remarks and criticisms, but we really do care what people think about us.
Mm.
And we want people to think that we're a good person or that we do have it all together and that we don't have any problems. I think there's something about what's going on inside of us. I mean, if you just look at social media, so much of social media is just, oh, look at how great my life is, when really it could be falling apart behind that screen, but we don't want anybody to know it.
Yeah. So, what led to the depression in your situation? Can you pinpoint that?
I can pinpoint a moment when the depression symptoms started to show up.
Okay.
I often tell people depression has a root.
Mhm.
Most likely the depression started years before I even recognized that I was depressed, only I didn't know what it was. But there was a moment when I stood in Dallas, Texas on stage before an audience of thousands. I mean, it was like 10,000 people in the audience. There was a lot of hoopla and drama, and there was music and applause. And because I was winning an award, one of the highest levels of achievement in the company, and this should have been a platinum moment because I had everything in this moment. And yet I began to think, this is it. This is what I shipped my kids off to a babysitter for. This is what I did the changing of the guard with my husband for, this 10 minutes of hoopla in the sun. And instead of rejoicing and being excited in this moment, my soul began to plummet, almost as if it was falling off a cliff. And I remember crying on the plane all the way home. But that was the start. That was when I began to recognize the symptoms that something was wrong.
Okay. And what was your experience with depression like? Once that started and it started to
Mm-hmm.
snowball because it always does, what
Mm-hmm.
was that like for you?
Yeah, it was. Every day grew increasingly darker. Every moment increasingly more desperate. I didn't understand. Back then, when I was going through depression, this was the middle of the 90s. And depression wasn't talked about openly. You didn't see it on commercials the way you do today.
Mm-hmm.
There was a stigma with depression. Nobody wanted to wear that label. Nobody wanted to claim that, well, I'm depressed. And so for me, especially those first several months when I continued to hide in the darkness by myself, continuing to put the mask on, pretending that everything was okay, but I was living this nightmare before my kids. They saw the screaming, and they saw the rage, and they saw the crying spells, and how I would leave them alone for periods on end while I went to go sleep off another dark day of depression.
So painful, but what you're describing is so common for
Mm-hmm.
those who struggle this. Friends, we're going to take a real short 1 minute commercial break, but I want you to stick with us to hear Patty share more about her experience with depression and how she overcame it. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where my guest today is Patty Mason, and we are talking about what it's like to experience depression and overcome it. Patty, how did you try to overcome the depression? Did you seek help?
Not at first. At first, I tried to fix myself. I tried to do everything I could think of to get better, but nothing worked. So I finally started to turn to family and friends. Only, as I had said earlier, I had worn the mask for so long and had worn it too well, they didn't believe me. I didn't want to tell them at first because of what I thought they would say, the criticism, the judgment, especially if they found out that I was abusing our oldest daughter. I mean, what would they think? Would somebody step in? Would they take my children away? So a fear kept me in silence for a long time until I finally got to a point where I began to realize I could not fix myself. So I went to family and friends first, but that ended up being pointless because they didn't understand and they just kind of wrote it off. And so many times, especially if it was family, they would start talking about their own problems, which only added to my problems because now I'm not only carrying my burden, now I'm having to carry their burden as well. And I got to the point when I began to realize family and friends weren't going to help me. My husband didn't understand, and he was writing it off, going, you'll get better. Don't worry, you'll get over it. And so I began to realize I needed to pursue medical help. I started to have this get fixed quick mentality. I began to think if I could just get a pill, I'd be fine. So I remember the day with phone book in hand, I started to call one doctor after another, only to hear things like, I'm sorry, we don't take your insurance. Or, I'm sorry, we don't handle that kind of depression. I remember talking to the last doctor on the list. It was a very kind woman who had happened to answer the phone. She herself wasn't the doctor. It was like the receptionist or something. And she listened to my heartfelt plea, only to tell me at the end of our conversation, I'm sorry, but we can't help you. It was at that moment the depression went even darker. And it was almost as if everything went black in that moment. Where before everything was dark, but now it's like it's pitch black. It almost felt as if I could no longer even see the hand in front of my face. And at that moment, that's when thoughts of suicide began to enter my mind, because now I'm thinking there's no way out of this. Nobody can help me. I'm totally alone.
And I think that that is a common experience. For whatever reason, people get to that point where they do feel helpless and hopeless, which is another tool of the enemy of our soul. But it's so convincing when you're in that dark place and people are telling you, I can't help you, or you'll get over it, you'll be just fine, because clearly they don't understand. What ultimately drove you to the point of suicide?
Having the belief that there was no other way out.
Okay.
I was convinced the only way out of this darkness, the only way out of this hell was to take my life. I also had myself convinced that my family would be better off without me because I was putting my kids through such turmoil, through such, I can't even begin to explain what I was putting my children through. But I had myself convinced they would be better off without me.
What do you think they would say now?
That's a good question. I had not thought about that before. What would they say now? I think now they probably, I am such a different person today.
I know.
than I was back then. They would be very grateful. I'm sure they'd be very grateful, because I'll tell you now, as a grandmother, my daughter has 2 young children now, and she's starting to appreciate me. It's amazing when you have, when you become a mother yourself, that's when you really begin to appreciate your own mother.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So my children would be very glad today. I'm not sure sometimes as they were growing up, but I think today they would be very thankful that I was with them, and that I had stayed with them, and that I'm with them today. And all 3 of my children, this is amazing. By the grace of God, all 3 of my children will tell you they have a wonderful childhood. And even especially my middle daughter, she voices it all the time. And I believe that was purely by God's grace, because my children were very young. They were 6, 4, and 1 when I was going through this. And now they're all grown and married and have children and starting to have children of their own. So I think God spared them a lot of the memories, because even my oldest daughter, when I was writing this book, I went to her and I asked for her forgiveness, and I talked with her about what she remembered. And to my amazement, she only remembered 2 of the incidences I remember a lot more.
Wow.
But somehow God spared her, blanketed her, protected her, something. And the other two, absolutely oblivious.
Wow. Oh, what a hand of protection.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get to the point where you attempted to take your life?
I did not. I thought about it. I planned it. I'm a very well organized woman. I need to have a plan of attack. But no, I never actually attempted it.
So then let's talk about what was the turning point? How was the cycle of depression broken in your life?
I finally got to a point when I turned to a God I didn't know. And I say I didn't know him not because I didn't know of him. I
Mm-hmm.
had grown up in church. I knew about God. I believed in Jesus. I even believed that he died on the cross for my sins. I could tell you Bible stories, but I had no personal relationship with him. But I knew enough that I knew he had the power to let me live or die. And I believed the only way out was to die. So I started to cry out to him to take my life. I remember praying every day for the madness to end, and I remember praying every night to never wake up. I also remember getting frustrated with him because he was not answering my prayer. I didn't realize at the time what his plan was. I think that's so true that we often get angry or upset at God because we don't think he's answering our prayers, but he's answering them in a way that is so beyond us, in a way that is so far beyond anything we could have imagined. God simply had other plans for my life, but I didn't see it at the time because the darkness was so great. But there came a day, and I remember this day vividly. It was December the 12th, 1996. And I got up that day again feeling frustrated that God had not answered my prayer. But I remember feeling like I had been ground into the ashes from which I came. There was absolutely nothing left of me. I could not go on like this one more day. I could not put my children through this one more day. And I got into the shower that day, and I remember sobbing. I remember crying out to God, only this time I didn't ask him to take my life. This time I asked him for much more. I asked him for a miracle. And I confessed to him that nobody could help me. And looking back, I think that that was critical. I think that confessing to him that I had no other option, that he was it, that no one could help me, only he could help me, and asked him to help me. And that was the day I heard a voice that said, go to MOPS. Now, for those who don't know what MOPS is, MOPS stands for Mothers of Preschoolers. I was already part of the organization, but because of the depression, because I didn't want to be around other people, I had stopped going for a while. But this particular day, I went ahead and went, even though I didn't feel like it. So often, God gives us an instruction and we just don't feel like it. But I fought past it, and I know I'm gonna go. And so with my son in tow, I went. But again, I put on the mask. I pretended everything was fine. I smiled. I ate. I conversed. I did a craft. I didn't want the other moms to know what I was going through. I didn't want these Christian ladies or these church mommies to know what I was dealing with, or how I was abusing my oldest daughter, or that I was suicidal. I didn't want any of them to know that. So I pretended. I listened to the speaker that day. She talked about lack of purpose and lack of joy, and how the only real joy is in Jesus Christ. She didn't talk specifically about depression, but there was something about her message that made me feel like she was talking directly to me. I remember at the end of her talk, she had shared a brochure, and she said that if anybody would like this brochure, to meet her in the back of the room. Now, this is interesting. Even though her message, I felt, was directed toward me, I still looked at that brochure and thought, the answer's in that brochure. I've got to get a brochure. So I remember watching her all the way to the back of the room, and I got up and followed her. And the moment I stood before her, it was as if a dam broke. Suddenly, there was something that came from her. There was a compassion and a love. Even though this woman had no clue who I was, she did not know my name, she had never met me before, but there was something about her that allowed this release to take place. And I began to dump my life at her feet. I rambled on uncontrollably, run on sentences. I was sobbing. I was not even making any sense to myself. And she let me go on for a few minutes. But at this point, because I was so hysterical, we had caught the attention of every woman in the room, who had proceeded to turn around and now stare at us. But as I had said earlier, I had reached a point now where I didn't care anymore. So it was like this woman had the answer. And I didn't care what these other women think. I needed help. And so I was just dumping my life at her feet until finally she reached a point where she just touched me right here on my left arm. She did not pray over me. She did not speak to me. She did not ask me any questions. She just touched me. And in that moment, it was instantly gone. The crying and the run-on sentences instantly stopped. It was like someone had come and shut the faucet off. The darkness that had been following me for so long had lifted. And the nausea that was in the pit of my stomach was gone. My spirit and my soul felt light, as if they had taken on wings and could fly around the room. I was stunned. I stared at this woman, absolutely stunned, because I knew she did not have the power to heal me, but there was a presence that came from her. There was so much love. Michelle, I looked into this woman's eyes, and it was like looking into pools of liquid love.
Wow.
It was amazing. And it was in that moment I knew God had healed me.
Wow. Incredible. But as I hear you talk about your story and the fact that you didn't want any of those women to know, I wonder how many more of those women were sitting there feeling the same way, not wanting anyone else to know because of the shame that we feel.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm so grateful, and I'm sure you are too, that several times in the Bible, God recounts stories of others who felt the same way, who got to that desperate place where they just cried out to God because they knew nobody else could help them. And sometimes I think God allows us to get to a place where we are so desperate and flat on our back that there is no other option but to look up at him and say, you're all I've got, because he wants to be all we have.
That's right.
He wants us to rely on him. And so, listener, if you are listening today and you are feeling the same way, you have access to the same God, and he doesn't show favorites. And so what he has done for Patty, he wants to do for you as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about what life has been like for Patty since that day after this commercial break. So stick with us, because we're going to talk more about the hope that you can find as well. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your hope-filled perspective. Patty, you've learned what it's like to have to trust God in the hardest of times. Those times when you knew there was nothing in and of yourself that you could offer anymore and people couldn't help. Will you share with us a little bit about how you found hope in that hardest time? Because that woman that was at the MOPS and sharing, like you said, she didn't pray for you. She didn't give you a magic potion, but what she did was offer love and a simple touch. Where did you go from there?
That's right. The days that followed were absolutely filled with joy. I went from this pit of utter desperation and darkness to just being on the mountaintop. It was like an entire week. I had this exhilaration. I remember one night I was cooking dinner in the kitchen, and I heard my husband yell from the living room. He said, "What's that noise?" I said, "Well, that noise was me singing." He wasn't used to so much happiness. He wasn't used to joy. He wasn't used to me being like this. So, but it was interesting how I had gone from not really giving God much thought or much time of the day, other than to try to cry out to him in desperation. But there was something different now. I went from not giving God a thought to other than take my life to now it's like I had Jesus on the brain. I couldn't stop thinking about him. And I wanted to know more about this God who found mercy and found the heart to heal someone as messed up as me. And so I remember going to a Christmas play a week after I was saved, and I had seen the reenactment of the birth of Jesus. Now, growing up in church, you have to understand I had seen the reenactment many times, but it hit me fresh. It was like I was seeing it for the first time. And there was something about it that just absolutely drew me in. So when the pastor took the stage, when the play was over, he asked if there was anyone who wanted to receive Jesus as their personal savior. Now, I must admit, growing up in church, I had no idea what he was talking about. I did not understand that my life was drowning in sin and that I was on the fast track to hell. I didn't understand any of that. I didn't understand what he was offering me. I had never heard the plan of salvation before. I look back now and I think how curious that I would have grown up in church and never heard the plan of salvation. But here I am hearing it for the first time. And there was something about it that even though I didn't understand what he was saying, what he was talking about, one thing I did know, I needed Jesus. And it was enough. And that was when I received Jesus as my Savior. And my life was now on a new path toward freedom.
And that's what he offers.
That's right.
Freedom.
That's right.
You talk in your book about forgiveness. What does forgiveness have to do with breaking free from depression?
Yeah. Unforgiveness can actually cause depression. I know one of the ways in which God helped me to heal. Now, this was part of my journey after he had delivered me from depression. Now, you have to understand that when I was set free from depression, I was set free from the symptoms, but there were still roots. There were still things that he needed to deal with so that I could remain free from the symptoms of depression. Being healed helped me to breathe again, helped me to, okay, now I can start to function again. But now the Lord started to dig deep. He started to dig into my soul to get to the things that had caused the depression in the first place. Because if we don't address the roots, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. So one of the very first things God started to deal with was forgiveness. I needed to forgive my dad. I needed to forgive the people who had hurt me from my past, like the kids at school who constantly harassed me and caused me to feel very insecure. I needed to reach a place of forgiveness, not because they deserved my forgiveness, not because it righted the wrong, and not because it fixed what had happened to me. I was still abused in the past, but now it was like forgiveness gave me a sense of newfound freedom, where it no longer plagued me, it no longer hindered my past, and it gave me a new sense of freedom.
And I think what's so important for people to hear is that forgiveness isn't denying what happened, but it's saying, God, you're in a better place to handle the situation. And I don't want to hold on to the resentment and the bitterness and the unforgiveness, because really it's like drinking a poison and expecting it to hurt somebody else. And most of the time they don't even know.
Right.
They have no idea, but it's really allowing God to redeem the situation, to deal with them. And it releases us. That's a heavy burden to carry when we are carrying bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness. And it does contribute to depression. And sometimes it's a lot of work. And I don't know about you, but there are times I'll forgive and then something will get stirred up in me and I feel the anger come up again. And I've got to make the choice to forgive again and again until it no longer affects me. And I've truly released them. So sometimes forgiveness is a process over time. But when I think about how much Jesus forgave me and died because of my sin, I didn't deserve that forgiveness, but he offered it freely.
That's right.
And scripture says if we want our Father to forgive us, we've got to forgive others. That's a pretty strong command. You know, God never leaves us where we are. So I'd be curious, Patty, how have your views on life, depression, or faith changed on this side of depression?
I believe that my life and my views changed because my view of God changed. It's amazing how when we get a correct perspective of God, life, the way we see circumstances, when we go through things, we have this whole new perspective. Because here's something that I learned in the process. Our view of God, if we have a false view of God or we have a right view of God, it affects our mental health. It affects our understanding. It affects the way we view things, how we view God, how we view ourselves, how we view people around us. And we have a much greater hope-filled perspective if we have the right view of God. And that was one of the things, that was the process that he took me through, was helping me to see him from a correct biblical perspective and not what I thought or what I had built up in my mind because of what I had gone through. So often when we think that when circumstances are hard or we go through things we don't understand, we can be accusatory of God, thinking God doesn't love me, God doesn't care about me. How could a loving God allow this to happen? It's because we have a false view of God. And in that false view of God, then we start to stir up all kinds of emotions that we start to camp on because we think now God has left me or abandoned me, or God is like my father, or God is like this friend who betrayed me. And we start to parallel these things to our earthly circumstances and our earthly relationships when we really don't understand. So one of the things in the process that God changed and shifted everything was the power of his word and the power of getting a revelation of his love for him. And it was the two sticks rubbing together that ignited a fire and that set me on a course to change the way I thought, to change the way I saw God, which in and of itself changed and abolished and changed the destructive patterns. It changed the way I thought. So therefore, the destructive patterns and the things that the way I think and the way I used to act slowly began to change over time as my perspective of God changed.
You know, that's where you and I have a parallel story, because when I was in the pit of depression, I remember praying 3 things every day. First was that God would give me an accurate perspective of him. Mm-hmm. Because like you just said, we often have a faulty understanding or appreciation of God. And so I wanted that accurate perspective of him. Then I prayed that he would show me his perspective of me. Because not only did I have a faulty perspective of God, but I knew that there was something wrong in my own perception of myself. And then the third thing that I prayed is that he would allow me to have the same perspective of myself that he has.
That's right.
And by praying those 3 things every day, and this was over a series of months, but over the series of months of praying that every single day, the depression started to lift because he revealed lies that I had believed about him and about me. And once those lies were brought into the light, I could reject those lies and receive his truth. That's and right. That is critical if we want to live a life of joy, free from a life of depression and worry and fear and anxiety.
Amen.
You and I have both talked about the fact that we had family members who didn't understand. They hadn't gone through it. So we're not belittling them for their lack of experience. It's just they couldn't relate because they hadn't gone through it. So what advice would you want to give to families who have a depressed loved one?
I would say the first thing is that understand that even though you don't understand the darkness, you are still an important role. You play a very important role in your loved one's life. And I would say, even if you don't understand, just listen. Just be a really good listener. You don't have to have the answers. You don't have to fix them. Just listen. I think that's one of the most important things we can do, is just when someone we love is struggling, and even if it's not depression, because there's so many things we can go through that we don't understand what they're necessarily going through. If you don't understand, don't say that you do. Just say, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. We'll do this together. And just listen.
I agree. If a listener is struggling with depression and any part of either one of our stories is resonating with them, what hope-filled perspective would you want to offer them today?
Above all, know that you are not alone. Even though you feel that you're alone, even though the darkness is so dark and you can't see any way out, know that God sees you. Know that He loves you. Know that you are not alone in the darkness. And also know that you are not the only person on the face of this earth to ever feel that way. Know that there are so many other people that you have never met, who are feeling just the way that you feel. But know above all else that you are not alone, that God is with you, and that there is hope. There is a way out, and just to cling to Him in the darkness, because He sees you, He hears you, He cares about you, and in His time and in His way, He will pull you from the darkness.
Yeah, so good. What suggestion, as we're wrapping up, would you have for someone that they could begin to implement today if they're in that darkness and they're feeling like you or I have felt in the past, where it feels like there's no way out? It feels like nobody can help me. What would you suggest to them to do today?
For me, I just started to cry out to God. Just even if you don't know Him, I didn't know Him, and I cried out to Him in that brokenness, because the darkness sometimes is so dark that we don't know what to do, because we can't see even to take the next step. So my first step to you would be just to drop to your knees right now, right where you are, and cry out to God and admit your need for Him.
Absolutely. Listeners, as we're closing, I just want to remind you of the scripture that comes from Psalm 42, verse 5, which says, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise Him, my Savior and my God." And that's the message of our hearts from both Patty and I, that when you are that downcast, when you're struggling with depression, the one sure place you can put your hope is in the God of the universe who created you. He sees you. He knows where you are. He knows what you're feeling. And He's just waiting for you to say, "I can't do it alone. I need your hope. I need your help. I need your healing." And He will answer. Patty, thank you for sharing your story and the hope that you have found. Would you be willing to close us in prayer for any listener who's listening today and resonates with what we were talking about today?
Heavenly Father, oh, how glorious you are. I give you great thanks and praise for healing me, for healing Michelle, for healing so many others. And there are those here today, Father, who may be listening and who are hurting and who are suffering and who are struggling, and they don't know the way out. Father, I pray for your healing hand to reach out and rest upon them. Let them know that you are present. Let them know that you love them. Give them a revelation of who you are and your goodness and your greatness, and that you are the victory. Let them know that this is not the end, but an opportunity for a glorious beginning with you. Oh, Father, we give you great thanks and praise, because you are our healer. You are our redeemer. You are our restorer. You have created us. You know us intimately. You even know the number of hairs on our heads, our thoughts before we even think them, and the words before they even form on our mouths. You see us, Lord, even in the darkness, because it's not too great for you. Shine your light, Heavenly Father. Shine your light, that we may reach up, reach for you, and find the hope that is in Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Patty. Friends, we are going to put links in the show notes to Patty's ministry, her book, and other valuable resources. We thank you for tuning in today. Today has been your Hope-Filled Perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until next time, may you have a hope-filled week.